Thank you, Mr. Hosey, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I want to thank the Honourable Member for Ipswich for opening the debate and laying out the different opinions, strongly held opinions on both sides of this debate. And I think it's really important for us to debate this issue because there are hundreds of thousands of people who are undocumented in our country. And it's important that we have as sensitive and nuanced a debate as possible on this very important issue, because by not discussing it, by not engaging with this subject, in fact, we create bigger problems for our society. In particular, Mr. Chairman, I want to focus on those who face severe exploitation because they found themselves as undocumented migrants in our country. I have no truck, as I'm sure most in our country don't, with those who are deliberately, willfully flouting our legal system and breaking the law in this country. But what I'm interested in is what we can do to protect those who arrived in this country who often, and according to the JCWI, arrived through legitimate means and found themselves becoming irregularized, and how we support those people. We have countless examples, including in many of our constituencies, of people facing violence, being trafficked, women facing domestic abuse, and sometimes they've arrived sometimes as spousal visas, and then faced huge amounts of exploitation. And although domestic violence is one of the areas where if you face domestic violence, you can apply to stay in the UK, even if your spouse doesn't sponsor you, it doesn't often pass many of the requirements, because if people don't have the police reports and so on, then it's quite difficult to prove to the immigration officers that they have faced domestic abuse and violence. So this is a complex area for those who face exploitation and who are vulnerable. And I have met many, many individuals who've fallen into, who face those sorts of issues. That's why I think it's really important, although we may have differences of views about the text of the petition, that we look at how we can build some consensus around those who are particularly vulnerable, who should be given an amnesty. And the wider context for me is, in relation to this debate, is that in the last year, since the pandemic began, the issue of what we do with undocumented migrants, what healthcare provision they get, whether they have access to COVID vaccines, affects all of us. And that's why, in some respects, it's a no-brainer to look at some of these issues carefully and think about how it benefits us as a society in terms of healthcare and protection for all of us. And we've already heard some of the issues around vaccination programs and people being fearful of going to get vaccinated. And many GPs do require people to register with them in order to get access to these vaccines. There are one-off offers of getting vaccinated if you're an undocumented migrant, but it's not comprehensive. So in terms of public health benefits to the whole of society, if we're going to combat the pandemic, we need to make sure the estimated 800 to 1.2 million people that are, according to the JCWI, are undocumented in our country, are given the protection. In terms of what we do going forward, as someone has already referred to in an intervention, the Prime Minister has, even as recently as earlier this year, said when people have been here for a very long time and haven't fallen foul of the law, then it makes sense to try to regularize their status. He also talked about an earned amnesty when he was Mayor of London for some 400,000 people who live in the capital. So I think that it's important for us to look at how we address this issue in a way that is sensible, doesn't lead to a pull factor, which many have raised concerns about, where we can have a managed migration process where there are legitimate routes to coming here to make a contribution, whether to study, to work here, to join family members, while at the same time recognizing that some people came to this country over the past decade and beyond, who have, for different reasons, found themselves in the irregular status category, and they didn't break the law. Those are the people I'm particularly concerned about, who then fell foul of the system. So I hope that as we go forward, we'll be able to look at how we can arrive at a response that looks at protecting people who've been exploited, who've been trafficked, who've faced huge challenges in our country, and also look at the opportunities for where they can make a contribution to our economy, given they've been here for a long time. So while I don't agree with the exact wording of this motion, I think it's very important that we look at what we can do going forward to protect those who face huge vulnerabilities, but also to ensure that, given we are still in the middle of a pandemic, that those who are not documented have access to vaccination programs, testing, and also treatment against COVID.